They thought it was just an old campervan, faded paint, cracked leather seats, and a faint lingering scent of dust and gasoline. For the Morgan family, it was a fixer-upper, a blank canvas for weekend getaways and family road trips. But what they found buried in the wall of that van would lead them down a path they never expected. A secret, sealed for nearly 4 decades, quietly hidden between plywood and insulation. It started with a strange rattle. One weekend, while removing a loose panel near the rear sleeping compartment, their youngest daughter, Emily, pulled out a small, folded envelope, yellowed, brittle, and addressed in trembling cursive. "To whoever finds this, please don't forget me." Inside, a series of handwritten letters, ink smudged by tears, dated from the summer of 1986, all signed simply L. No last name, no return address, no record in any national missing persons database, but the letters told a haunting story of a young girl held against her will in what she described as a place that moves, of hunger, fear, and fleeting hope. She spoke of watching trees blur past through slats in a wall, of long highways, and voices she couldn't forget. And then, silence. The Morgans didn't know what to believe. Was this a hoax, a story, or was it real? Local police were stunned, not because they recognized the name, they didn't, but because, in 1986, no girl matching the description had ever been reported missing. Not in that state, not anywhere. So who was Elle? Where had she gone? And how had no one noticed her disappearance? This wasn't just a cold case. It was a case that had never even existed. Tonight, we'll follow the chilling trail of Elle, from her first letter to the final clue that changed everything. We'll dive deep into a decades-long mystery that defied logic, challenged law enforcement, and unraveled a story far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones no one was ever supposed to find. It was the summer of 1986, and the sun hung high over the sleepy streets of Helena, Montana, a town where everyone knew everyone, and where danger felt like something that only lived in the headlines of distant cities. Back then, children played in the streets till dusk, doors were left unlocked, and secrets, real ones, were hard to come by. At the edge of town, in a modest blue house with white shutters, lived a girl named Leah. She was quiet, observant, with a kind of sadness behind her eyes that few noticed but never forgot once they did. She was small for her age, just 14, and known for always carrying a little notebook in the pocket of her worn denim jacket. Her mother, Anne, worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital. Her father, well, Leah never spoke much about him. Some said he left years ago. Others whispered that things were more complicated. The only clear thing was that Leah spent a lot of time alone. Neighbors would later say she was the kind of girl who slipped under the radar, not because she wanted to, but because no one was really looking. She wasn't popular, didn't get into trouble, and didn't cause scenes. She simply existed. The last confirmed sighting of Leah was on a Tuesday afternoon in early July. It was hot, too hot, and she had walked to the small gas station on the outskirts of town to buy a cherry soda. Surveillance footage from that day, grainy and time-stamped in flickering red numbers, shows her walking in, head down, exchanging a polite smile with the clerk. She didn't speak much. She paid in cash. She left the store. And then, nothing. She never came home. Anne, returning from her night shift, thought Leah had simply gone to a friend's house. When she wasn't back by sunset, Anne started making calls, first to neighbors, then to classmates, then to the sheriff. At first, the response was tepid. She's probably with a friend. She'll turn up. She's 14. Teenagers do this. But by day 3, Anne was frantic. Flyers went up. The local news ran a 30-second segment. Volunteers combed the woods behind the school, but there was no trace, No footprints, no dropped belongings, no witnesses who saw anything beyond that last gas station visit. Leah seemed to have evaporated, and something even stranger began to settle in. No one could find any real documentation of her. The school said she had transferred in just a year earlier. Her medical records were incomplete. There was no official birth certificate on file. It was as if Leah had appeared from thin air and then vanished the same way. Anne insisted she was her daughter, showed baby photos, school drawings, a crumpled birth announcement tucked in a drawer. But something didn't add up. Child Protective Services had no case file, no record of custody. Police began asking quiet, uncomfortable questions. Was Leah who she said she was? Or was there something Anne wasn't telling them? Anne's grief, though real, became tinged with defensiveness. She stopped answering the door. She pulled the blinds shut. Friends said she barely slept. Eventually, rumors started. Had Anne done something to Leah? Was there abuse? Was Leah even her biological child? But no charges were ever filed, no evidence ever surfaced, and the search slowly lost steam. 6 months later, Leah's name faded from memory. No national bulletin was ever filed, no missing child poster ever left the county. And over time, the story of the quiet girl with the denim jacket was forgotten. But Leah hadn't been forgotten by everyone. In a worn notebook hidden in an attic box, one of her classmates, Jenny Caldwell, had written something strange. A sentence circled in red, dated just 2 weeks before Leah's disappearance. She said she hides notes in places she's sure no one will find until it's too late. It wouldn't be until decades later, inside the wall of a used campervan in Idaho, that someone finally would. 1986 passed into 1987. The flyers curled and peeled from telephone poles. Leah's bedroom stayed exactly as she left it, a quiet tomb of soft flannel, tattered books, and fading sunlight. Anne stopped answering questions altogether. In fact, she stopped talking to nearly everyone. What little interest remained in Leah's case was absorbed by a lack of leads and a town that had moved on. There were no vigils, no media pressure, no reward, just a single box of case notes in the Helena County Sheriff's Department, filed under Leah, possible missing, status unconfirmed. But behind closed doors, Anne kept searching. Her home became a shrine of maps, letters, receipts, anything that might help her remember what her daughter had said, where she might have gone. Some believe Anne knew more than she ever admitted. Others say her grief turned into obsession. Whatever the truth, by 1990, she sold the house and vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Back at the center of the case was that lone piece of hard evidence, the gas station surveillance footage. Every few years, it would resurface. A small group of amateur sleuths online obsessed over the blurry image of Leah pushing open the door, looking over her shoulder. They'd zoom in endlessly on a shadow behind the glass. Was it someone following her, or just a reflection? In 1996, 10 years after the disappearance, the gas station changed hands. The original tape was thrown out. Gone, just like Leah. But let's rewind to that summer day, in the minutes after she left the store. A delivery driver, Eddie Coombs, remembered seeing a white campervan parked along the gravel road behind the store. It was unusual, he said, because it was facing the wrong direction, partially hidden by scrub brush. Eddie, now retired, told local paper the Helena Chronicle years later, "I didn't think anything of it. Old vans break down all the time. But I remember seeing someone in the driver's seat with sunglasses on, just sitting there, staring straight ahead. Didn't even blink. There was no report of a campervan being stopped in the area. No one searched that road, but something else stood out in Eddie's memory. He swore he saw a young girl walk toward the van from the gas station. Her gait was slow, hesitant, and when she got in, Yes, the van pulled away within seconds. That moment never made it into the official report. Years later, when Eddie tried to speak to local law enforcement again, the file was gone. Misplaced, they told him. Or maybe it never existed. For years, that van haunted him. He even described it, a cream-colored 1970s model with orange stripes, the kind that was once common on highways and campgrounds across the country, the kind you wouldn't look at twice, the kind that could disappear easily. And that's exactly what it did. The moment Leah stepped inside, she was gone. What happened next? We only know through the letters. Letters no one found until 37 years later, stuffed behind a cracked fiberglass wall in a camper purchased off a roadside lot just outside of Boise. The Morgans, a family of 5 relocating from Spokane, had bought the van second-hand. It was old but solid, needed work, but the price was right. They didn't think twice when the seller told them it had some history. But during a routine cleanup, while replacing a rotted mattress and rewiring the back panel lights, 13-year-old Emily Morgan pulled loose a warped section of interior siding. Behind it, in the cavity between insulation and fiberglass, she found a tin box wrapped in 2 layers of flannel and duct tape. Inside, a stack of aged envelopes, each carefully dated, each bearing the same initials, LM. The ink was smeared. The paper smelled faintly of mold and oil, but the words were still legible. And the first one began, "If someone finds this, please tell them I was here. Please tell them I was real." The letters weren't random. They were a diary, written in hiding, sometimes days apart, sometimes weeks. They described a girl held in what she called the room behind the bench, in a space just long enough to lie down. She spoke of travel, states she thought they had passed through, Nevada, Utah, Colorado. She mentioned a man, "He has a black watch and smells like diesel," and a second figure she referred to only as the quiet one. There were descriptions of towns she could barely see through slits in the van's wall, and noises, highway horns, rain on metal, voices on a CB radio. But never names, never faces, just fragments. And then, the most disturbing part, she wrote that she hadn't seen herself in a mirror in weeks, that the man would take her outside only at night, wearing clothes that weren't hers, that he made her memorize a name that wasn't hers either. She ended each letter the same way. "I don't know if I'll ever get out, but if you find this, please don't forget me. My name is Leah." Those letters sent shockwaves through the small Idaho town. Local news picked up the story first, then regional networks, and then the FBI. But when agents ran Leah's name through national records, they came up empty. No missing person, no national alert, no open file. The girl who vanished in 1986 was never officially missing. That changed almost overnight. The letters were authenticated. The paper and ink matched the era. And DNA swabs from a tiny bandage wrapped inside one of the letters matched a hair follicle found in the van's ceiling insulation. The girl had been real. And so was the nightmare she described. But who had taken her? And why wasn't she ever reported? The search that followed would shake everything people thought they knew about how someone could simply disappear without ever being missed. The rediscovery of Leah's letters in 2023 breathed new life into a case that had technically never existed, but the mystery surrounding her vanishing went far beyond her disappearance. It was the silence that followed. No police reports, no missing child alerts. No one, beyond her mother, ever claimed to know she was gone. How could that happen? The letters were immediately sent to forensic linguists. They confirmed the handwriting was consistent across all notes and likely written by someone between 13 and 15 years old. The tone was unmistakable, innocent, frightened, and above all, real. The phrases were raw. She spoke of hunger, of being told to be quiet or the floor would disappear, and of a longing so deep it soaked into every word. I miss the sound of rain on my roof. I miss music. I miss laughing. Investigators now had a timeline. The first letter was dated July 11th, 1986, the same week Leah was last seen at the gas station. The last letter, dated December 3rd, 1986, simply read, "It's colder now. He says we're going somewhere new. I think I'm running out of time." And then, nothing. The FBI, now leading the investigation, issued a national appeal. Who was Leah M.? Who had driven the campervan across 5 states in 1986 with a child hidden inside? And how had no one ever noticed? It wasn't long before online forums reignited. Amateur sleuths pulled records from old yearbooks, scanned archives of local newspapers, and flooded tip lines with leads. Some remembered a girl from Montana who vanished, but without a case file or media coverage at the time. Everything was anecdotal. Then came the break. A retired school secretary from Helena named Norma Price called in. She had worked at Jefferson Middle School in 1985 and remembered Leah, a shy, quiet girl who showed up mid-semester with no transcripts. She remembered because she was the one who had to call Anne, Leah's mother, repeatedly about missing immunization records. Anne always promised to bring them in. She never did. Norma had written Leah's name into the school's ledger by hand. That page, still intact, listed Leah as a provisional student, home placement, no records on file. Anne's story, that Leah had been her biological daughter, was starting to fall apart. Investigators reopened Anne's background. They discovered she had moved to Helena from Billings only months before enrolling Leah. There was no trace of a birth certificate for Leah under Anne's name, no hospital records, no adoption paperwork. And then came the most disturbing clue yet. A single case file, buried in the archives of a defunct counseling center in Billings, revealed that Anne had once worked as a live-in nurse for a man named Richard Cullens in 1984. Cullens had 2 children, one of whom had died in a tragic fall. The other, a young girl, had reportedly been sent to live with her grandmother in Oregon. That girl's name was Leah, but there was no record of her ever arriving in Oregon. No school enrollment, no doctor visits, nothing. Richard Cullens died in 1985. Anne left Billings weeks later and showed up in Helena with a young girl no one knew. The story was no longer just about a missing child. It was about an identity, one that had been hidden, rewritten, and ultimately erased. As this revelation came to light, Anne was located in a rural part of northern Idaho, living under a different last name. She was 72, alone, and reluctant to speak. When approached by federal agents, she refused to comment. Legally, without formal guardianship records or a birth certificate, there was still no solid link proving she had abducted Leah. But one thing became clear. She had not reported the girl missing, not in 1986, not ever. And when shown one of Leah's original letters from the van, Anne quietly broke into tears. She didn't say a word. She just touched the page and whispered, "She was supposed to be safe." Meanwhile, the campervan, now impounded, became the center of the investigation. Experts examined every inch, using UV lights, infrared scanners, and ground-penetrating radar. They discovered modifications in the back, a false panel, floor bolts, and a sealed compartment behind the built-in bench that perfectly matched Leah's descriptions. And in that space, they found a strand of blonde hair and a child's shoelace. DNA tests confirmed both belonged to the same unknown girl whose follicle had been found in the insulation. The van had been a prison on wheels. But whose? And how had it traveled from Montana in 1986 to Idaho in 2023, unregistered for nearly 35 years? That's where the story took another turn. The VIN number on the van had been partially scratched, but a deep etching on the chassis led investigators to an original owner, a man named Kenneth Ward, who purchased the vehicle in 1982 and reported it stolen in early 1987. His police report noted that it vanished from a storage lot during the winter, a lot he shared with his brother-in-law. That man's name was Ethan Dorsey, a former long-haul trucker with a criminal record and a disturbing pattern of employment that always seemed to overlap with regions Leah mentioned in her letters. Dorsey died in 2009, but interviews with his former co-workers revealed something chilling. One of them, a mechanic, remembered that Ethan always kept to himself, but had once shown up with a beat-up camper he wouldn't let anyone near. Another remembered hearing faint music coming from inside while Ethan worked night shifts in a warehouse parking lot. No one ever investigated further. He had been hiding her in plain sight. Theories began forming fast. Did Ethan abduct Leah from Anne? Did Anne give her up? Was Leah rescued? Or stolen? Or both? And why didn't Anne report her missing when she disappeared? The truth seemed buried in decades of silence and blurred morality. But for the first time in nearly 40 years, people were finally asking the right questions, and the search wasn't over, because one final clue was still hidden in those letters. In the last note, dated December 3rd, 1986, Leah wrote, "We're going somewhere cold. He said the snow will cover everything. I think we're close to where it all started." That single line would reignite the case in ways no one saw coming. "We're going somewhere cold. He said the snow will cover everything." That final sentence haunted investigators. It wasn't just poetic. It was a breadcrumb. FBI analysts worked alongside cold case units across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, cross-referencing any records from December 1986 involving abandoned vehicles, unexplained fires, or skeletal remains. They were searching for anywhere Leah might have been taken, anywhere he might have stopped, buried her, or left her. But this search wasn't just in official records. A digital army had been mobilized. Reddit threads with thousands of active sleuths, YouTube commentary breakdowns, and amateur archivists trawled through local newspaper clippings from the 80s and 90s. One user found a curious item from December 8, 1986, buried in the classifieds of a small-town Wyoming paper. Found abandoned camper van, engine running, keys in ignition, Highway 287. Report to Carbon County Sheriff's Office. The date matched. The location, southern Wyoming, also lined up with Leah's mention of a long stretch of snow and cattle fences. But when FBI agents contacted the Carbon County Sheriff's Office, the case file was incomplete. No VIN, no photos, no evidence of follow-up. The van had been towed and later auctioned off to a scrapyard in Rawlins. If that camper had been Leah's final stop, there was no longer a trace. However, something else turned up, something buried deep in a box of forgotten evidence from the same county. A local hiker, Ron Edders, had reported a strange little site near Muddy Gap, Wyoming, in late December 1986. He said he found a ring of scorched metal, some scraps of cloth, and a child's glove, half buried in the snow. But there had been no missing child reports to connect it to, and the file was closed as non-criminal. It had never been investigated. Now, 37 years later, it was reclassified as a potential crime scene. When agents returned to Muddy Gap in early 2024, the area was overgrown and blanketed in snow. But ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of buried metal, remnants of an incinerated object, and scattered bone fragments. DNA testing is ongoing, but early analysis indicated the remains belonged to a juvenile female between the ages of 12 and 15. And embedded in the melted floor pan of a long, rusted metal shell, they found something else. the charred remains of a school ID card. Though blackened and brittle, the first initial, L, was still visible. Investigators now believed they had uncovered Leah's final resting place. But one question still remained. How had she ended up in the van in the first place? Theories varied wildly. One suggested that Anne had taken Leah from her original family, either rescuing her from abuse or abducting her in desperation. When Leah grew older and harder to control, Anne may have allowed her to be taken, possibly sold, to someone like Ethan Dorsey, who was known to frequent truck stops and work for cash under various names. But no money trail ever emerged. Another theory was even darker, that Anne had been under duress, coerced by Dorsey, or connected to a trafficking ring. But without Anne's cooperation, and with Dorsey dead, those paths were limited to speculation. When Anne was questioned again in March 2024, she gave a chilling answer. "I did what I had to. You don't know what it was like back then. You don't know who he was." Pressed for clarification, she simply stared ahead and said nothing more. Without confession or further evidence, no charges were filed. Anne remains a person of interest, but not a suspect. Meanwhile, the Morgans, the family who found the letters, were still trying to process what they had uncovered. Emily Morgan, now 14, the same age Leah was when she disappeared, told a local journalist, "I just wanted a van. I didn't know I was going to find someone's life inside." The campervan, now considered a mobile crime scene, was taken into FBI custody for permanent forensic archiving. The tin box that held Leah's letters was sealed and preserved, a time capsule of sorrow, survival, and forgotten screams. And in the digital world, Leah's story became a viral sensation. YouTubers, podcasters, and TikTok creators debated every angle of the case. The phrase, "Tell them I was real," became a chilling rally cry, featured in tribute videos and haunting animations. But for law enforcement, the media buzz was bittersweet. It brought attention, but also confusion. Misinformation spread. Fake letters were posted. Some even claimed to be Leah herself, still alive, hiding. DNA tests crushed those hopes. The remains found in Wyoming, as confirmed by mitochondrial DNA analysis in late April 2024, were a near-certain match to the girl in the van. Leah was gone, but her story, her voice, had finally been heard. And that, perhaps, is what saved her from being erased completely. In early May 2024, a small memorial service was held in Helena, Montana, organized by former classmates and community members who had once known Leah, if only in passing. A plaque was placed in the park near Jefferson Middle School. It reads, "Leah M., you were real. You were loved. You will not be forgotten." But the case remains open. Because what Leah never said, not in her letters, not even in the final one, was why she was taken, or why no one came looking for her, except for a girl 37 years later, peeling back the wall of an old camper. By the spring of 2024, the world knew Leah's name, but not her full story. The discovery of her letters had sparked outrage, grief, and fascination in equal measure. But investigators weren't satisfied with closing the case on a vague conclusion. Leah had been real. She had suffered. She had likely died in or near that van. But how? And more importantly, why had no one done anything? That's when they began to dig deeper. Into Ethan Dorsey, a man who, on paper, seemed unremarkable. Born in 1951 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Served briefly in the Army, worked a series of jobs as a mechanic, trucker, and welder. No marriage, no kids, a handful of arrests for assault and public intoxication. Nothing serious enough to mark him as dangerous. But beneath the surface, there were cracks. Federal agents reopened Ethan's employment records, and what they found sent chills through the task force. From 1985 to 1987, the exact window during Leah's captivity, Ethan had worked for a now-defunct logistics company out of Helena. His roots, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Utah, the same places Leah mentioned, often vaguely, in her letters. She hadn't known the cities, but she remembered the landmarks, the red hills, the metal bridge, the desert with the buzzing wires. Agents compared her descriptions to actual truck routes and roadside landmarks, still standing today. They matched, almost perfectly. And then came the critical piece, a shipping manifest from August 1986. Ethan had signed off on a delivery in Tonopah, Nevada. A motel nearby had a record of a guest checking in under the name R. Cullen, the same last name as the man Anne had worked for before she appeared with Leah. It seemed Ethan had been using aliases, not just to hide, but to keep the past alive, or buried. Investigators re-interviewed surviving co-workers, and one, a now-retired dispatcher named Sam Godwin, recalled something he'd never told police. Ethan once came in late to a job, said he'd had to settle down the girl in the van. I thought he meant a girlfriend or something, but he looked tired, frantic, said she'd scratched the walls. Godwin shrugged it off at the time, but now, he realized, Ethan wasn't speaking figuratively. Leah had been in the van, and she had been trying to escape. Search teams returned to the original camper. Using luminol and 3D scanning, they found deep, narrow scratches along the underside of the bench wall, invisible to the naked eye. And beneath those scratches, etched faintly into the frame, a final, desperate message. Still here? Still Leah? Please. This wasn't just evidence. It was a scream, frozen in metal. And it led to something even more disturbing. Because not long after Leah's disappearance in 1986, another report, long buried, surfaced from Oregon. A 12-year-old girl named Rachel Timmons had vanished while walking home from a school bus stop outside Eugene. She was never found, but the detail that stood out? She had told her parents just days before that she'd seen a van with orange stripes driving slow behind her. The description matched Ethan's van, down to the paint job. At the time, no one had connected the dots. Rachel's case was treated as a local abduction. No ties to Montana, no mention of Leah. But Ethan had been in Oregon. His old pay stubs proved it. 2 missing girls, same era, same van. Was Leah the only one? That terrifying question reframed the entire case. Because now Leah's letters were no longer just a testimony of survival. They were a possible window into a serial predator's pattern. Leah had described others in her second letter. Sometimes I hear crying at night. Not me, someone else. Or maybe it's just in my head. At the time, investigators thought it referred to trauma-induced hallucinations, but now they weren't so sure. Forensic analysts re-examined the campervan for evidence of multiple occupants. Beneath a second panel, previously overlooked, they found remnants of a tattered child's blanket, fibers consistent with clothing not identified as Leah's, and a charm from a bracelet engraved with the name Rachel. The van, it seemed, had been used before, and maybe even after. The discovery was crushing, and it blew open a horrific new possibility. Ethan Dorsey may have been a serial abductor, a traveling predator who used long-haul jobs and untraceable aliases to capture, hide, and dispose of children in transit. And Leah? She was the only one who ever left a record behind, a voice echoing from the walls of a forgotten vehicle. A girl no one knew was missing, begging to be remembered. Her letters, now digitized and archived, were read aloud by voice actors in a viral YouTube documentary that racked up 14 million views in a single week. The video, titled Letters in the Walls, ended with the quote that would come to define her legacy. "I don't know if I'll ever get out, but if you find this, please don't forget me." And people didn't. A congressional hearing was launched in May 2024 regarding unregistered missing children, revealing that during the 1980s and 1990s, as many as 15% of runaway or abducted children were never entered into federal databases, especially if they were under informal guardianship or custody arrangements. Leah was one of them, but her words, fragile, handwritten, smeared with time, pierced through a silence decades thick. In doing so, she changed everything, and there was still more to uncover. Because in the very last envelope found in that van, one that had gone unnoticed until a second inspection, Leah had written a cryptic sentence. He said there's another place, a quiet place, in the trees, where no one goes. Investigators marked it as a vague fear response, but online sleuths disagreed because they believed Leah had left one final clue, one that pointed to a second hiding spot. He said there's another place, a quiet place, in the trees, where no one goes. Those were the last words Leah ever wrote. At first, the FBI interpreted them as metaphor, the frightened ramblings of a young girl resigned to isolation. But to the growing community of online sleuths, those words felt deliberate, like a trail marker, a map waiting to be read. Reddit threads began exploding with theories. A user named VanVault88, a former Forest Service worker from Idaho, zoomed in on the phrase, "in the trees, where no one goes." He suggested it might reference national forest land, large, heavily wooded areas known for being unpatrolled, underfunded, and remote, places perfect for hiding something or someone. He overlaid known routes Ethan Dorsey had taken between 1986 and 1987 against federal wilderness zones. One location stood out, Bitter Root National Forest, along the Idaho-Montana border. It was desolate, cold, mostly inaccessible by standard vehicles after the first snowfall, but it had logging trails and a string of abandoned ranger cabins. The FBI took notice. Within weeks, they had permission to conduct a search of the area. Drones scanned the tree canopy, rangers hiked through frozen underbrush, and then, less than a mile from the old logging road, they found something. Not a body, not a grave, but an old tarp-covered cache of belongings. Inside a rusted steel locker, buried under loose stone, they found a child's shoe, a spiral-bound notebook with pages torn out, a cracked Polaroid camera, and a backpack containing girls' clothing, sizes consistent with both Leah and Rachel Timmons. There was no blood, no obvious evidence of death, but carved into the locker's lid, faint but legible, was the name Leah. No last name, no date, just the name. And this time there was something new. Hidden in the backpack was a photo, a blurry Polaroid. At first glance it showed only trees, blur, motion, but in the right light, and after digital enhancement, a figure emerged. A girl, sitting against a tree, eyes hollow, legs crossed, arms wrapped around herself. She was staring directly into the camera, and behind her, barely visible, was the rear bumper of a vehicle, the same cream-colored campervan. For investigators, it was devastating confirmation. Leah had been taken to this location, possibly as a final holding spot, and she had likely been left there, either temporarily or permanently. But here's where the case took a surreal turn, because one of the items found inside the backpack wasn't from the 1980s. It was a receipt, damp and partially decayed, from a general store just 40 miles south, dated August 2002. Someone had been back. Someone had returned to that site 16 years after Leah's last letter, and that led to a new suspect. The receipt was signed with a name that, on the surface, meant nothing: Ron B. Kelly. But Ron B. Kelly, it turned out, had been a mechanic at the same logistics depot Ethan Dorsey worked for in 1986. He had remained off the radar for decades, living in small towns under various names. When the FBI ran his prints, they found something shocking. He had been arrested in 1994 in Oregon, under a different alias, for unlawful confinement of a minor. The charge had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but the location? Less than 30 miles from where Rachel Timmons had gone missing. Ron Kelly was brought in for questioning in May 2024. He denied knowing anything about Leah or Rachel, claimed the receipt must have been stolen. He asked for a lawyer. He was released due to lack of direct evidence, but surveillance teams were placed on him immediately. And then, just a week later, he vanished, left his rental, left his truck, gone without a trace, just like Leah, just like Rachel. Some believed he fled, others feared the truth, that someone, or something, else was involved, that maybe, as Leah hinted in her final notes, Ethan Dorsey had not acted alone, that he had help, and that help was still out there. The theory that had once seemed too dark to consider, that Ethan was part of a network, was no longer a fringe idea. Several cold cases from the 1980s and early 1990s were reopened, all involving missing girls, abandoned vehicles, or sightings of cream-colored campervans. None were solved. But one thing was clear. Leah had started something. Her letters, her desperate coded messages from within a prison of plywood and insulation, had pulled back a curtain. And behind it was an entire generation of forgotten children. Emily Morgan, the teenager who discovered the tin box, was now at the center of a national movement. Her family, devastated by what they had uncovered, began organizing fundraisers for cold case units. They toured the country, raising awareness for missing children never entered into databases. And in an emotional interview on 60 Minutes, Emily said, "I think Leah left those letters for me. I think she knew someone like me would find them. And I'll never stop telling people what she went through." Her voice cracked as she pulled out a laminated page, the final letter, the one that ended, "I don't know if I'll ever get out, but I still believe someone will find me." That belief, fragile, trembling, written in pencil, had outlived its author, and it had uncovered something no one was ready for. But as investigators faced the final stretch of their inquiry, one question loomed. Was Leah the beginning, or just one chapter in something much larger? The answer, and its devastating implications, would begin to reveal themselves in the aftermath. In the months following the revelation of Leah's final location and the mysterious reappearance of Ron B. Kelly, the narrative shifted from horror to reckoning. For decades, Leah M. had been a ghost in the cracks of the system, a girl who had fallen through every safety net, shielded from discovery by silence, bureaucracy, and indifference. Now, the world could no longer look away. The FBI established a formal task force, Project Still Leah, to investigate other cold cases from the 1980s and 90s that involved similar circumstances. Girls between the ages of 10 and 15, last seen in rural or transient environments, with incomplete records or ambiguous guardianship. The scale of the task was overwhelming. By August 2024, the task force had identified 11 additional cases across 5 states that bore eerie similarities to Leah's. Several were reclassified as potential abductions. 2 were reopened after decades of dormancy. The discovery of Leah's letters had acted like a spotlight, exposing the failings of an entire generation of child protection systems. And for the first time, there was public accountability. Congressional hearings convened, calling on former child welfare officials, state police officers, and adoption services. Families who had lost daughters long ago sat in the gallery, clutching faded photos and clippings, watching as experts testified about how missing but never reported was a much more common phenomenon than anyone had believed. The term ghost children began trending across social media, referring to children like Leah, whose identities were blurred by informal custody, private arrangements, or rural isolation. There was a collective national shudder. How many Leahs had there been? Meanwhile, Anne, Leah's so-called mother, was hospitalized in June after a mild stroke. Reporters gathered outside her facility, hungry for statements, a confession, something that could tie together the pieces. But Anne never gave one. Her health declined rapidly, and on July 14, 2024, exactly 38 years to the week after Leah vanished, Anne passed away. She left no written statement, no deathbed revelation. But in her belongings, tucked in an old coat pocket, authorities found a photo, a Polaroid, yellowed, bent, of a much younger Leah. Not a prisoner, not a captive, just a girl in a field of sunflowers, smiling faintly at the camera. The back read, "Her name was never mine to give. I just wanted her to have a chance." That note, just 13 words, reopened an impossible debate. Had Anne rescued Leah from something worse, or had she stolen her and later abandoned her to a monster? The answer may never be fully known. What is known is this: Anne never reported Leah missing, never sounded the alarm, never told the truth, and that silence helped bury Leah's story for nearly 4 decades. But for Emily Morgan, the girl who found the letters, the story was never just about darkness. It was about rescue. In a speech given at a national youth conference in Washington, D.C., Emily stood on stage holding Leah's first letter. She told a room full of teenagers, Leah wasn't supposed to be remembered, but she is, because someone cared enough to look, and I think that's what we're supposed to do. Be the person who looks. The room fell silent, and then it erupted in applause. Emily's courage sparked a wave of volunteer search networks led by young people. Teens began joining DNA registries, scanning yearbooks, uploading photos of unidentified persons. The Still Leah initiative spread to classrooms, YouTube channels, and true crime podcasts across the world. Leah, it seemed, had become more than just a victim. She had become a voice. But despite the public response, questions still remained. The largest of all: was Leah really the only one? Forensics teams continued scouring national forests, highway rest stops, and scrapyards. New tips surfaced, some credible, some not. The FBI expanded their search radius based on the Campervan's previously traced movements, and one final haunting clue came in September 2024. A hunter in Idaho, nearly 60 miles from where the locker had been found, came across a strange pile of stone under a collapsed tree. Inside, a small box. In it, another letter. Signed, "To whoever finds me next, don't be afraid. My name is Rachel." The letter from Rachel changed everything. For a second time, a voice thought lost had risen from the silence, this time from a girl whose disappearance had been all but erased from official memory. The handwriting was different from Leah's, shakier, as if written with trembling hands. Date at the top, March 1987. "I don't know if he can hear me when I write, but I think Leah would have wanted me to. She said words matter. She said someone would find us. If they found her, maybe they'll find me too." It wasn't just a message. It was confirmation. Leah hadn't been alone. The tone of Rachel's letter was different. She seemed younger, more confused. There were references to the box in the trees and to the girl with the soft voice, presumed to be Leah. But what stood out most was Rachel's final paragraph. "I don't think he likes that we're together. He says one of us has to go. Leah said if I ever get the chance, I should run toward light, not away from it. She said I should leave signs. So I did. I left things." This cryptic message sent search teams into overdrive. What did signs mean? Had Rachel left a trail? And if so, was anyone still following it? The hunter who found the letter, an Iraq War veteran named Colby Wren, returned to the site with investigators. His discovery spot was GPS marked, and within 2 days, a second cache was uncovered. A rusted tin lunchbox buried beside a hollowed-out tree containing fragments of what appeared to be a pink cloth, a broken pen, and a button engraved with a small daisy. None of it seemed significant until the pen was unscrewed. Inside, a tiny strip of film, preserved enough to be developed. The image? 2 girls, huddled together under a blue tarp. One, clearly Leah, the other, younger, with darker hair and a tear-streaked face. Both alive, both looking directly at the camera. Authorities began to piece together a disturbing timeline. Leah had gone missing in mid-1986, Rachel in early 1987. That meant there was overlap, possibly months where the two were held together. And then Leah was gone. Had she been killed to make room for Rachel? Or had she sacrificed herself? No one could say. But the evidence confirmed a terrifying truth. Ethan Dorsey was not just a captor, he was a serial predator. And now, thanks to Rachel's letter, Ron B. Kelly was no longer just a person of interest. In a twist that stunned the nation, Kelly was tracked to a remote farm in eastern Washington using advanced satellite heat mapping software. When agents arrived, the house was empty. But inside, they found a wall of locked file cabinets and decades' worth of paper maps marked with color-coded pins. One folder, marked Done, contained old driver's licenses, hair clippings, and children's belongings. At least 5 other names, all children, were listed. 4 of them had never been reported missing. The 5th, Rachel Timmons. It was the evidence the FBI needed to issue an official federal warrant. But Kelly, it seemed, had vanished again. A nationwide manhunt began, the largest since Eric Rudolph in the early 2000s. Airports, borders, and known safe houses were alerted. Bounties were raised. But as of the time of this recording, Kelly has not been found. And so the story, tragically, remains unfinished. But Leah and Rachel's voices, once hidden in fiberglass and buried beneath snow, have already changed the world. In Helena, a bronze memorial now stands outside Jefferson Middle School. It features 2 girls sitting side by side, holding hands, staring into the forest beyond the playground fence. The plaque reads, "In memory of Leah and Rachel, may every missing child be seen, heard, and found." Emily Morgan, now nationally recognized for her role in uncovering Leah's story, helped unveil the statue. She stood beside Rachel Timmons's mother, who had flown in from Eugene, silent and tearful, clutching a daisy pin. In her speech, Emily said, "We don't always get to know how the story ends, but we can make sure the next one never has to be written." The Still Leah Foundation now supports cold case investigations, maintains a national registry of informal guardianship children, and advocates for updated legislation on missing persons reporting. Because of 2 lost girls, the law has changed. Because of a van, silence has been broken. Because of a letter, a nation remembered what it had forgotten. And somewhere out there, one man still runs from the truth, but every day the circle tightens, and every day the voices grow louder. Because Leah was right all along, words matter, and the right ones, even whispered from a hidden wall, can echo through generations. Sometimes it's not the loudest stories that leave the deepest marks, but the quiet ones, the whispers behind a wall, the words etched in the dark, the faint voice saying, "Please don't forget me." Leah's story wasn't meant to be told. It was meant to vanish, buried under time, silence, and the worn-down floorboards of a forgotten campervan. And yet, here we are, still talking about her, still following her words. still listening. What makes this story so haunting isn't just what happened, but how long it didn't matter to anyone but her. For nearly 4 decades, Leah was invisible. Her name never made it into a database. No Amber Alert, no nightly news plea. She didn't even exist to the systems built to find her, and yet she existed. She laughed, she cried, she wrote, she fought to be remembered. And in the end, she was. By a girl pulling apart the walls of a dusty camper, by a photo left in a coat pocket, by a daisy-shaped button tucked inside a lunchbox under a tree. Leah's tragedy, and Rachel's too, reminds us that silence is a dangerous accomplice, that forgetting is its own kind of crime, that even in our most overlooked corners, someone's life might be waiting to be heard. So now, we ask you, the viewer, something simple but powerful. What would you have done if you found Leah's letters? Would you have turned them in, ignored them, tried to forget? And what will you do now that you've heard her voice? Will you share it? Will you remember her? Because Leah wasn't just a girl who disappeared. She was a girl who spoke, even when no one was listening. And her words found a way through the cracks. Let them stay alive, not as evidence, not as tragedy, but as a promise that no child should ever be forgotten again. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it, subscribing, or even supporting Missing Persons Foundations. And more importantly, if you know something, if you remember something, say something. You never know who you might help bring home. This was her story. Now it's yours too, in loving memory of Leah M. and Rachel Timmons, dedicated to the missing, the voiceless, and those still searching.